All right, everyone, give me five as we are on to week 5 of the college football season. And what a week we're in store for. Once again, we have 4 top 25 matchups, including a top 5 showdown in Tuscaloosa on Saturday night. The 7 games on the docket this week: Wisconsin and USC, Arizona and Utah, Arkansas and Texas A&M, Oklahoma State and Kansas State, Louisville and Notre Dame, Illinois and Penn State, and closing things out with the game of the week and one of the biggest games of the season: Georgia and Alabama, top 5 showdown in Tuscaloosa, prime time Saturday night. And I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's get right into the week 5 college football predictions. First game on the docket this week: Wisconsin and USC. Wisconsin, they are off of a bye week, and before that, a loss to Alabama in a game where they got off to a nice start, but then Alabama, they became more and more dominant as the game went along. While USC, they're looking to respond after losing their first game of the season to Michigan on the road last week. Currently, USC is favored by 14.5 points. Wisconsin is down to freshman quarterback Braden Locke. Against Alabama, he went 13 for 26, 125 passing yards, and a touchdown. How does Wisconsin pull off this upset if they're going to be able to? There are two things that I think could work out in Wisconsin's favor. One, if they stay disciplined. Wisconsin has currently accumulated 11 penalties this season, only 11 penalties. It's tied for the second fewest in the FBS. And if they can assert the running game early, if Wisconsin can go back to the team they were a decade ago, which ever since Luke Fickell took over, Wisconsin has been more of a passing team. But it's in Wisconsin's best interest to run the football early and often in this game. As in the loss to Michigan last week, USC allowed a total of 290 rushing yards. If Wisconsin's offensive line can have their way with USC's defensive front, I do think Wisconsin can stay in this game. I am going to pick USC to win this game, but as far as the spread of this game is concerned, I do think if you feel like there's value in taking the points with Wisconsin, I definitely would be okay with that, but I'm not going to recommend that. This is a very angry USC team. Either way, I'm picking the Trojans to win this game, but I'm interested to see how Wisconsin looks in this game off of a bye week and a terrible loss to Alabama the week prior. And of course, with how USC responds after losing a game against Michigan on the road where they feel like they could have, maybe should have won if two things go differently in that game. Two or three different things go differently, then they probably would win at the end. Up next, a Big 12 matchup: Arizona and Utah. And I feel like the Big 12 is going to be up for grabs until the very end of the season. I feel like no team is going to have a significant lead as far as this conference is concerned, as I do feel like it's going to be an absolute gauntlet. I feel like the Big 12 is going to be the most competitive that we've seen the conference in a long time. I feel like it's going to be overshadowed by the SEC and the Big 10. But this is going to be a very competitive conference. Utah, right now, they are the favorites in the Big 12, at least in my opinion. Everything else, it's a question mark after that. And Utah, they take on a team that a lot of people, including myself, felt like could be a sleeper to win the Big 12 conference: Arizona. The last time we saw Arizona on the football field, They lost 31-7 against Kansas State. Arizona, they had a bye week last week, an extra week to respond and recover from the loss against Kansas State. Arizona, they allowed 235 rushing yards to Kansas State in that game. And we are waiting to see if Arizona running back, New Mexico transfer running back, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt will be eligible to play, as he has eligibility issues right now, which confuses me and it doesn't really make much sense, as he did play in week 1, but I don't know how exactly he's not eligible. I don't know if it's an academic thing or what. If somebody can clear that up in the comment section, I'd really appreciate it. But Micah Bernard for the Utes, he has 456 rushing yards on the year, which is 6th in the FBS. And we saw Utah's defense rise to the occasion. Although they did give up a couple touchdowns at the end of the game, but Utah, they were well in control of that game. It was a 22-19 final score against Oklahoma State on the road, but I felt like it was just a situation where Utah knew they were on cruise control in that game, so they just let up a couple of scores to not go all out until the game was, like, to not go all out the entire game, because you don't want to risk injury, as the Big 12 will be an absolute gauntlet. And as the season goes along, you need your team to be as healthy as you possibly can. Isaac Wilson in the game last week, he went 17 for 29 for 207 yards, a touchdown pass, and he did throw a couple of interceptions. Will it be Isaac Wilson or Cam Rising getting the start in this game? I am not sure if that's going to matter in this game, however, whether it is Isaac Wilson or Cam Rising starting at quarterback. I do feel like Utah is going to win this game, because we've seen Utah defensively against a strong offensive team in Oklahoma State. And I do think Utah, they're going to easily win the time of possession battle, as Utah is 4th in time of possession, and they'll keep a high-octane Arizona offense on the sidelines. I feel like this is going to play out a little similarly to Arizona Kansas State a couple weeks ago, but I do think Arizona, they might be able to make this game a little closer. But either way, I am picking Utah to win and stay unbeaten. Up next, Arkansas and Texas A&M in the Southwest Classic. Arkansas is 8th in total offense, averaging 524 yards per game. Running back Jaquindon Jackson is 4th in the FBS in rushing yards, currently at 472 rushing yards on the season. For Texas A&M to win this game, they need to limit the big plays from a high-octane Arkansas offense. In last week's game against Bowling Green, the 26-20 victory for A&M, their defense gave up a 65-yard touchdown play and a 40-yard touchdown play. Going into the season, there were media personnel that felt like Texas A&M would be a sleeper team in the SEC, because they felt like A&M would have one of the best defenses in college football. Marcel Reed, in his first 2 starts for Texas A&M against Florida and Bowling Green, 351 passing yards, 4 touchdown passes, and no interceptions. And that's a big key right there, that Marcel Reed, he is playing clean football. He also has 174 rushing yards, and he's averaging 6.96 yards per carry. And I do feel like for A&M to have success the rest of the season, I do think they need to have Marcel Reed be the quarterback until further notice. As Connor Wegman, I did think he had a lot of potential, but injuries has really hindered his career so far. And I just think that seeing Marcel Reed in these past couple of games, I do think it makes A&M's offense look a lot better. And I am going to go for the upset here. Even though Texas A&M, they have won 11 out of the last 12 in this rivalry, and this rivalry has been one-sided, for some reason, more often than not, Arkansas, they make this game close. And in rivalry games, you can put rankings and records and numbers. You can just put them aside and let it play out on the field. But I just think Arkansas will be able to keep this close with their offense. And a big key here for Arkansas that I think will work in their favor. They are converting on third down 61% of the time, which is second in the FBS. And A&M's defense, I don't know if I can trust them to win a game like this. Given they gave up a 65-yard touchdown play and a 40-yard touchdown play to Bowling Green, even though Bowling Green, they are an underrated team, they did the same thing to Penn State to make Penn State work for the victory. But a big reason why A&M lost to Arkansas a couple of years back in 2021 was because of the big plays that Arkansas was able to have offensively in that game. And I think that's the case this week. I think Arkansas, I think they pull off this upset. Oklahoma State and Kansas State, both teams looking to respond after losing their first game of the season last week. Oklahoma State to Utah and Kansas State to BYU. And there are some factors I am looking into when determining who I think wins this matchup. Oklahoma State, they have the experience on their side as far as offense is concerned. A seventh-year senior quarterback in Alan Bowman. As Mike Gundy, he took him out of the game against Utah for a couple of possessions, but then put him back in at the end. And Oklahoma State, they scored a couple touchdowns as the game was winding down. But before that, they were held to just 3 points. And I don't know if Oklahoma State's offense is just overrated and we don't realize that, or is Utah's defense just really good? I'm leaning towards Utah's defense just being really good, as Utah, I did mention that they are the favorites in the Big 12 is Utah, and how I felt like Utah's defense, they just pumped the brakes towards the end of the game, knowing they had the game won and they were in full control of that game, and just gave Oklahoma State a couple of touchdowns to end that one. While Kansas State, so many mistakes on offense in that game for Kansas State. Turnovers, even the special teams, they allowed a punt return in that game. But they didn't completely go one-dimensional to an extent. I mean, they have been known for running the football in these past several years. But despite losing by nearly 30 points, they still had 228 rushing yards against BYU's defense last week. And I mentioned last week I felt like Oklahoma State was just saving Ollie Gordon for conference play. But I don't know if that is the case anymore. I'm hoping it at least is the case. But he only had 11 carries in the game last week. I do feel like if Oklahoma State is going to win this game, Ollie Gordon is going to have it at least 20 to 25 carries in this matchup. And I do think there may be some possibilities of rain for this game. I think it's only a 30% chance depending on when this game is. Which I do think that I was going to pick the team I feel like would run the football better anyway in this matchup. And that is Kansas State, as I do feel like with Kansas State running the football, if they run it efficiently and keep Oklahoma State's offense on the sidelines, I do think it will be a long day for the Cowboys, and I am picking Kansas State to respond this week after their first loss of the year. And these are two teams in the Big 12 that felt like we're going to be front runners to begin this season, and they still might be. But both teams looking to respond to after losing their first game, but one of these teams will lose two in a row. Louisville and Notre Dame. Louisville picked up a productive win against Georgia Tech last week. An underrated Georgia Tech team, but at times an inconsistent Georgia Tech team. And now they go on the road to take on Notre Dame. And Notre Dame after week one, a big takeaway from that week for me was Notre Dame was going to be one of the best defenses in college football this season. And I still feel like that is the case, even though the very next week they did lose to Northern Illinois. But the defense, they played well. They held Northern Illinois to just 16 points. It was the offense just couldn't get things going in that game. And I also said at the same time that Notre Dame's offense was a big reason why I'm not sold on them being a playoff contender. And in the two games after Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, they put up, I believe it was 65 points against Purdue. And then against Miami, Ohio last week, they won by a score of 28-3. And if Notre Dame runs the table, I do feel like if they finish the season 11-1, I do think they would have a resume good enough, depending on how USC's season plays out before that, to obtain an at-large bid. No matter what happens with Northern Illinois, even though we now know Northern Illinois lost last week to Buffalo. Louisville is 12th in scoring offense, 47.3 points per game on average. They're also 14th in total offense. So Louisville, they have done great offensively so far this season. Notre Dame, they are 10th in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 9.75 points per game. They are 18th in rushing offense. And I bring that up because in last year's game, Louisville won by running the football. And I do think that this season is going to be a reversal of that. I think Notre Dame is going to run the football well in this matchup. I did mention last week that a big key for Georgia Tech in pulling out the upset against Louisville was if Haynes King can be mobile in the game. As Louisville, they did give up over 100 rushing yards to Jacksonville State's quarterback. And I want to see more of Riley Leonard throwing the football, but I do think Notre Dame's ground attack is going to be the difference maker in this game. I am picking the Irish to win. Even though Louisville, they have done really well so far offensively, they're an underrated team in college football that doesn't get a lot of credit, in my opinion. I do think Notre Dame's running game is the difference in this matchup, and I have the Irish winning. Illinois and Penn State. Illinois is coming off of an emotional victory over Nebraska in overtime this past Friday night, and the Illini spoiled what was meant to be a beautiful night at Memorial Stadium, the celebration of the 400th consecutive home sellout. And the Illini sent home the Nebraska fans in heartbreak, devastation, despair, questioning why this Nebraska team keeps going back to their old habits that have hindered their success in these last several years. They go from a hostile environment in Memorial Stadium to another hostile environment, Happy Valley, to take on Penn State in prime time. And the Penn State fans will be absolutely amped from start to finish as playing Penn State on the road is one thing, but playing them on the road at night in prime time, that's just a completely different animal. And I do want to point out that Penn State is favored by 17 and a half points in this game. And I want to bring that up because this is a top 25 matchup, and I feel like 17 and a half points, I do feel like that's a lot for a top 25 matchup. Even though I do understand why Penn State is favored by 17 and a half, as this is the first massive test for Illinois. Is this game we're going to see how good Illinois really is. Illinois, they have been talked about as an underrated team that people don't really talk about. Illinois is a quiet 4-0 right now. And Illinois, I understand how they won at Nebraska last week, as it was their defense and taking advantage of Nebraska's mistakes, whether it be Dylan Raiola just missing out on a wide open touchdown pass, which led to a missed field goal to end that drive. Lack of discipline on the Nebraska defense, multiple penalties on the defense that really hindered Nebraska's chances of winning that game. And Illinois, they had Dylan Raiola sacked 5 times in that game. And Penn State's offensive line is a much stronger offensive line than Nebraska's. But how is Illinois going to pull off this upset? As Penn State, they are 9th in total defense right now. They're 10th in rushing offense. And I bring that up because Luke Altmaier, he did play phenomenal this past Friday night. But can Illinois, can they stop the run? I think that's a big question. A big question mark. But a big factor for Illinois in this game, they are +7 in turnover margin so far this season, which is tied for second in the FBS. Can they match Penn State's physicality in this game? Can they run the football themselves this matchup? Because I do feel like that Penn State, I feel like they are about maybe 5 times the team Nebraska is right now, even though it looked like Nebraska was starting to get back to relevance and notoriety. They're off to a strong start. They're playing clean football. Dylan Raiola is this next big thing in college football. The comparisons to Patrick Mahomes. I'm going to pick Penn State to win this game, but I would not be surprised if Illinois, if they overcame all the odds and pull off the upset. As Illinois, they have upset Penn State before. Something is just telling me that 17.5 points is just a little too much. However, there's a current narrative about James Franklin, about how he can't win these big time games. But they're mostly top 10 games, as he does at least decently against ranked opponents that are from 11 to 25. So I have Penn State win this game, but I just don't know if they cover at this point in time. I'm just feeling like the 17.5 is a little too much. But either way, I have the Nittany Lions winning this matchup, as this is really another test for Penn State. You're taking on an underrated Illinois team after having to play all 60 minutes against Bowling Green, like Texas A&M had to last week. Closing things out with the game of the week, Georgia and Alabama, a top 5 showdown in Tuscaloosa. And I am going to be honest, I have no idea who I'm going to pick in this game. This game is an absolute coin flip. I am looking at my notes here, and I do not have a pick for this game written down. So it is going to be an 11:59 decision for me as far as who I'm picking to win this game. And this is going to be, at this point in the season so far, the biggest game of the season. And both teams are off of a bye week. And you could not ask for anything better than that. For 2 top 5 teams to be off of a bye week, given an extra week to prepare for this game in what is, at this point so far in the year, the biggest game of the season. Georgia is fourth in total defense, only giving up an average of 202 yards per game. Alabama is 13th in total defense, only allowing an average of 248 yards per game. A big question mark for Alabama going into the season. Not only was it going to be how Kalen DeBoer was going to handle following in the footsteps of Nick Saban at Alabama, taking over for a legend, as Kalen DeBoer is under the most pressure of any college football coach in a very long time, if not ever. Taking over for Nick Saban, the greatest college football coach of all time. How will he handle the pressure? But also, how will Alabama look on defense? As Washington, they weren't the best defense last season, at least on paper. They were towards the bottom in total defense last year, but their defense stepped up at multiple points throughout that last season. Even though the stats may not show it, but their defense, they did have their moments. And so far, Alabama's defense, they have stepped up to the plate so far, only giving up an average of 248 yards per game. Quarterback Jalen Milroe has 8 touchdown passes and no interceptions so far this season, as that was a big issue with Jalen Milroe towards the beginning of last season for Alabama, as he was having some turnovers. Issues with the turnovers, but then Jalen Milroe, he did get better as the season went along last year. He also has 6 rushing touchdowns on the year so far. Both teams are in the top 6 in scoring defense. Georgia is 3rd in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 6 points per game. Alabama is 6th in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 8.67 points per game. Alabama, with this Kalen DeBoer offense, 49 points per game on average, which is 6th in the FBS. And both defenses are in the top 4 in yards per play allowed. Alabama's 3rd at 3.7 yards allowed per play, and Georgia is 4th with 3.5 yards per play allowed. The last time we saw these two teams on the field, Georgia won a 13-12 defensive game against Kentucky. And Alabama, they had a dominant win over Wisconsin despite a little bit of a slow start. But they became more and more dominant as that game went along. And Georgia, they do have the advantage as far as coaching is concerned. As Kirby Smart, he has experience in these big-time games. Well, for Kalen DeBoer, this is his first SEC game. This is his first big test as the Alabama head coach. At least his first major test. He did have a slight test against Wisconsin a couple weeks ago on the road, but Alabama, they passed that test easily. But this is the first major test for Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, taking on Georgia, when Alabama, they have been Georgia's kryptonite these past couple of seasons. A big key for this game for Alabama's defense. Georgia is 12 for 12 in the red zone so far this season. Every time Georgia has been in the red zone, they have gotten points. And Georgia, they are a very angry team. They only won by a single point against Kentucky last time they played a game. And for championship teams, there's always 1 or 2 games during the year where you have to play all 60 minutes. You just have to find ways. Georgia, they found a way against Kentucky. And Georgia's very angry. They're going to play the chip on their shoulder, I feel like. But at the end of it, I am going to go with Alabama winning this game. I feel like Jalen Milroe is going to be able to frustrate Georgia's defense enough in this game. I do think it's going to be a very, a very competitive game. But in the end, I'm going to go with the Crimson Tide. I do feel like their crowd will be a difference maker in this game as Alabama picks up a 3-point victory. And that will do it for my Week 5 college football predictions. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Also, if there is a game that I did not predict this week that you would like my thoughts on, please leave it in the comment section and I will give you a response. For those of you that tune in for the NFL picks, the NFL predictions video for week 4 will be up tomorrow. For those that don't, enjoy the games on Saturday, and I hope to see you back here next week.